again, Viewpoint. Our guest this morning is Chris Miller. If you feel like beating up on him for the bad weather you've had, the number is 648-5510. Chris, we were talking about releasing of the balloons a few minutes ago. Instrumentation, of course, that those take aloft, and of course, ultimately they come down. Mm-hmm. Do you have what percentage would you guess would be that people would find those and turn them in?
It's about 20%.
20%. Yeah. Well, that's better than the voters in Springfield.
Right, it is by almost 3 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. 20% of all of the instrument packages. They're called radiosondes that we tie to the balloons and send them up. We get those returned back, and that's important because that helps us save some money because they can be used again, and they get sent back to headquarters in Kansas City. And then they fix them up and send them out so they can be used again.
The wonder of it is there aren't. Well, of course, they just drop randomly, goodness knows where, and in streams and forests and lakes and plowed fields. I'm surprised though that more people don't find them as they work their fields.
Right, and they're pretty small. They weigh only about 1.5 pounds. They're primarily a styrofoam type shell with a cardboard sleeve around it.
So
they're only about. Yeah, because they're only about 6 inches tall, roughly, and about 3-4 inches across, so they're pretty small. Much smaller than they used to be. They used to be pretty heavy plastic and about 3 to 4 times bigger and easier to see. But these can be tough to find. But they have a battery in there, so it can transmit the data back to us, and there's little wires sticking out of it, and sometimes people get a little freaked out when they see a box that's coming out of the sky with wires sticking out of it. And,
the aliens have landed.
Or worse.
Well, right. I don't want to belabor this point. The material of the balloons, is that a plastic or vinyl, or what is the actual balloon material?
Yeah, the balloon material it's a vinyl type, a latex type of, almost like a type of latex vinyl rubber glove that a doctor would wear, similar to that, a little bit thicker, so that it could expand. But when it gets really high up in the atmosphere, when it pops at about 100,000 feet up, it is very cold up there, right about 60 below zero, and the balloon is so stretched out that the material gets very thin, and it literally shatters. It's almost like a light bulb breaking in little pieces.
Oh, really?
And then there's a little parachute
there's a tiny little parachute that opens up and slows the descent of the instrument. And like I said, it doesn't weigh much, so we don't need much of a parachute, but at least it slows it down some before it hits the ground.
So in theory, it could break over Logan County and end up way down in Cairo, Illinois somewhere by chance if the wind stream is right.
Yeah, I'll tell you, this year with you talk about the jet stream, when there's a strong jet stream, wind speeds, we've had them over 200 miles per hour this year.
Oh my.
And we had one of our balloons popped, and the instrument landed somewhere in northeast Indiana and western Ohio area from here.
Oh my.
And went quite a ways away.
Yeah.
Most of them are landing in eastern Illinois, usually about 50 to 100 miles east to southeast of here.
What is the prevailing wind here on a day-in, day-out basis?
Yeah, our prevailing wind is from the west. And again, that's kind of a, I don't want to say a misnomer, but people get kind of mixed up by that sometimes because, we have a prevailing west wind. We usually do, but weather doesn't always come at us from the west. We can have bad storms come at us from the south. I've seen them come from the north. In fact, last year we had a storm with a very weak tornado up around Peoria that moved from east to west. It moved the other direction.
Why?
It just depended on the storm was spreading out, very slow moving. The storm moved very little, in fact, and when it spread out, the cold air from the rain from that storm spread out. It spread in all directions, but it was stronger going from east to west in that particular case. And the storm just kind of drifted that way, and the little tornado that developed actually went from east to west. Extremely rare. Only about less than 1% of all our tornadoes come from the east.
You know, since you've used that T word, actually, that's why we were going to be together this morning. We were going to talk about tornado preparedness. Now, how come we had a tornado in the winter in Petersburg?
Sure. Well, I tell you, actually, it's not that uncommon. to have a tornado in the winter. In fact, we have a higher incidence of tornadoes in the month of November, in the month of December, than we do in October. Simply because to cause a storm, to create a storm that's strong enough to produce either the high wind gusts or a tornado, you need to have a lot of moisture. You got to be able to lift that air up and keep it going. And to get that type of weather condition in the winter, that's when you have those warm, kind of muggy days. The day we had that tornado, it was in the 60s. It was quite humid, pretty windy. So storms developed, moved very rapidly, and produced tornadoes. We've had tornadoes nearby in January. We've had them in February. It just, our peak season is April, May, and June. That's when, here in Central Illinois.
That's our tornado season.
That's our, and I like to say it's our peak season because we get 80% of our tornadoes in those 3 months. But the other 20% are distributed amongst the other months, including the winter months.
Is it because to me it seems that year-round it's damp in Central Illinois. We call it humid in the summer, but it's damp in the winter too. And the wind doesn't keep itself to Chicago entirely. It's pretty windy in the flatlands here too.
In fact, we have more wind. If you look at statistics, Chicago's average wind speed is less than ours.
I believe that.
And it's and that's why there are the wind farms that are going up around here, because it's windy in this part of the country. Also out in the plains, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, but we're pretty windy here as well. And when we are windy, especially when the direction's from the south or the southwest, it brings up some of that moisture from the southern states and from the Gulf of Mexico, and that's why we have that damp, humid air.
You mentioned the plain states, and I think of the Depression era, and we've all seen those great pictures of those folks and how the winds just devastated that lack of moisture. True, the drought and the winds just devastated those areas out there. What do you have a prediction as to what we might be looking at in the future as far as possible drought?
Right. Well, that's something we're going to be watching for this year, for the summer. So far, it looks
more
like
so than usual. Pardon me for interrupting.
Well,
you.
What we're looking at. First, let me start out with the spring. It looks like in the spring we're going to continue in this weather pattern we've been in, periodic precipitation, and so planting it could be kind of a challenge this spring, trying to get out in between the couple days you don't have any rain. But then in the summertime, it's kind of looking like our weather patterns are going to shift at that point and go toward the dry side, and not good when you need those periodic rains, especially in June. So that's something we're going to be watching pretty closely, because whenever we get out of one of these La Nina type weather patterns that we're in now, that I talked about, we got to watch that following summer pretty close for dry weather to establish itself over our area for, in some cases, it could be a couple of years.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There's a song that says spring will be a little late this year. I hope that's not true. What is the prediction for spring as far as when we will finally, thank goodness, get some warmer weather?
Yeah, break out of this, break out of our snow, and which we might get a little bit of tonight, or I should say tomorrow, later tomorrow night, Thursday night, and again on Saturday.
It's just a flurry. Not so much.
Maybe an inch or so. It doesn't. Right now, it doesn't look like it doesn't look like a big storm. Actually, it looks like a much bigger chance for extremely heavy rain in southern Illinois. Don't need that down. A lot of the rivers down there are already they're bank full or cresting or way above that. So we're going to watch southern Illinois really carefully over these next few days. They could get quite a bit of rainfall down there from this, but looking at the springtime, when is spring going to be approaching us? Well, we're going to be dealing with these waves of cold and warm for at least another month. So I wouldn't see an early arrival of spring for us.
You're not much fun to have on.
I'm sorry.
Well, does that mean that you're thinking there will maybe be a higher than usual incidence of tornadoes as spring approaches?
Well, especially when we get on some of those warmer, humid days. That's the other thing that the La Nina weather pattern brings us. When we have the above normal precipitation in the spring, that usually means thunderstorms. And that usually means strong storms in the spring. So we got to watch that, because 4 of the last 6 times we've had a La Nina winter, the following spring in Illinois had way above normal numbers of tornadoes. In a typical year in our state, we average about 44 tornadoes. The last 3 years in a row, we've had very close to that. We've had right between 45 and 50 tornadoes for the year. So this year could end up being a little more active than what we've seen. The other 2, I said 4 out of 6 years had way above normal tornadoes. The other 2 years had almost none. So it's feast or famine with this kind of weather pattern. So if we start establishing a severe weather pattern early and getting severe storms, especially when we get into March and April, we're going to have to look out, because it could be active. If it doesn't really take hold and we don't get much in the way of strong storms in March and April, then I think it's going to be a pretty quiet, which I think nobody would complain with.
Mm-hmm. Is it going to be a hot summer, though, do you think?
Well, usually when you get, that's what we're thinking, because when you get into the dry, you don't really get hot weather here in central Illinois unless it's dry. You get the warm. You get that warm and humid, but it's very hard to get above 90 degrees when you have a lot of humidity. And when it's it's really
it just
tough.
It feels like it's 112.
It feels warmer because of the humidity. You get a day when it's 89 and the humidity is really high. It's horrible. It's oppressive out there, hard to breathe and everything. But in order to get those temperatures way up to 90 or close to 100, you have to have dry and the almost drought type conditions.
You know, my brother kids me about our weather up here, and when it gets to be 100 and so down there, then he'll send me a little information, but then he'll always say, but it's dry. Well, it's
the old "but it's dry"
it's still plenty hot.
So is an oven.
Yeah.
It's a dry heat.
You know, this is not a 9-to-5 job that Chris has out there. How many folks do you have out there at NOAA?
We have 23 people.
24/7 operation, of course.
24/7, and we're not all 23 there 24/7. But typically we'll have at least 2, oftentimes 3 people there at one time, at least 24 hours a day. Now, if there's severe weather, strong storms, that'll increase, sometimes triple or quadruple. We'll have as few as 7, as many as 12. So in a real active severe weather pattern, we'll have half our staff there until the weather passes. And not just this area. We're forecasting the weather for areas west, Galesburg, down to Rushville, those areas, all the way to the Indiana border. So we've got 1/3 of the state of Illinois right in the middle that we're watching.
And you're the only NOAA installation in central Illinois?
That's correct. Yeah, there's only one other one in the state, and that's in the Chicago area. Outside of Joliet.
Would get one.
Yeah.
They always get what they deserve.
But I wanted to mention, too, that starting this Sunday, we've the National Weather Service, we've teamed up with the Illinois Emergency Management Agency to promote severe weather safety and awareness starting this Sunday, February 27th, through next Saturday, the 5th of March. And it's to remind people about what they need to do to prepare ahead of time, because we don't want to stick our head in the sand and say, well, or at least you shouldn't, and say, well, it's never going to happen to me, because we're in an area where tornadoes occur quite a bit. Here in Illinois, we rank 5th in the country for the most tornadoes.
So when we hear the radio warnings, most of us have little radios that go beep, 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 and you go up and turn that on, and then you hear the announcement. If we get an announcement on our little radios, we need to take those things more seriously. Oh,
absolutely. And in fact, 3 types of warnings that I really wanted to underscore. Well, first of all, I do want to mention this. the difference between a watch and a warning, because people get confused. I'll stand there in the grocery store and I'll hear somebody say, "Oh, here we're in a tornado warning for the next 6 hours." Okay, we don't issue tornado warnings that long. That's a watch, and what a watch means is for a period of about 6 to 8 hours, we're telling people in a large area, usually about half the state of Illinois, that in this area you got to watch out because storms are going to start erupting in the next several hours, so you might want to think about changing your plans. When a warning is in effect, we're telling you that a trained storm spotter has seen something and reported it, or one of our meteorologists detected that something is developing based on what they see on radar, and we're trying to let people know ahead of time they need to take shelter because this storm is approaching. But a tornado warning, I mean, it kind of stands right there. Everybody knows tornado warning, tornadoes coming your way, or a storm that has rotation with it in the clouds, and it could produce a tornado any moment. It's coming your way. Severe thunderstorm warnings, a lot of people just kind of frankly blow them off.
Sure.
And say, oh, it's just a severe thunderstorm warning. But with those, we get the straight line winds, and another type of wind that we call a downburst wind that produces just as much wind damage as most of the tornadoes we get around here, but in a wider path. So actually, I think those oftentimes can be worse in many cases. We also get the big hail with those. And then there's the flash flood warnings, and that's when the roads are flooded and you really shouldn't be driving into those areas. And I have to say, you know, with this preparedness week and having people at least think about what's going on with this, you were talking about Thomas Jefferson, some of the quotes he made. Well, his friend Ben Franklin had a wonderful quote about preparedness, and he said, "By failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail." And
very
so,
profound.
really, you need to. And that's a wonderful statement. So, we encourage people to at least think about what they would do if storms were approaching their area. And next Tuesday, which is the 1st of March, at 10 o'clock in the morning, when they usually test the sirens around here, the first Tuesday of the month, we are going to do a statewide tornado drill, and we're going to be sending out an actual test tornado warning for every county in the state of Illinois, so that weather radios will alarm and other broadcasts, we encourage them to carry that warning and let people know this is a test and that they can that they should use that time. Schools, businesses, homes, churches, anywhere people gather. So they can use that time to plan and prepare.
And that again is Tuesday next.
Tuesday, March 1st at 10 a.m.
Right.
One thing before closing, Chris, we're advised to go below when we hear the warning if we have a basement. Is there any validity to suggesting which wall one should go to? Is that all an old wives' tale?
That's an old wives' tale. Years ago, we used to think everything came from the southwest. Not all. 30% of our tornadoes come from the southwest. The others come from the west, the northwest, south, north, other directions. So it really doesn't matter about the wall. Really what it matters is get low, get underneath something like a stairwell or underneath a heavy piece of furniture, but get down to that lowest floor. No basement, get to an interior hallway, a closet, bathroom without an exterior window is a good choice. And then finally, if you're in a mobile home, just get out.
Get out of there.
Get out.
Well,
get out of the mobile home.
And if you're in a mobile home, you are in a mobile home.
Exactly. Oh, you got to be so careful.
This is the opulent studios of WLCN up here. You're in a mobile. Well, once again, Chris is just a cornucopia of information with us. We really appreciate your time and sharing your expertise with us, Chris. It's always fun to have you back. It's never the same thing. We always learn something new, don't we?
You want to believe it.
And once again, we'd like to close with a quotation that's somewhat pertinent to the day. And this one I found, it says, "Another place where no one is ruined by success is the Weather Bureau." Thank you for